How you doing? What's energizing your days? What's keeping you inspired here as 2025 rolls on? I just got back from a 24-hour whirlwind trip to New York City with my middle child. He had an audition there for the new school and their jazz program. So we flew in, caught a great show at the Winter Jazz Fest. And then we ate a meal and he did his audition, which we think went well. And we got a fantastic bagel at Murray's on 6th Avenue, caught a movie and flew back home. And of course, now the youngest child has a cold, and so he's staying home from school tomorrow, which if you're a parent, you know how that throws a wrench into all of the schedules. But that's not why you're here right now. You're here because you're curious about today's guest, the amazing novelist and creative Jane Roper, who is also a parent of children entering the college life, which we touched on a little bit. But mostly, we talked about being a writer, being an artist. We talked about the importance and the value of restrictions and the benefit of constraints, especially in the realm of creative briefs. Jane says she wants a creative brief that has an opinion, and that isn't just a dumping ground of information. She wants to know why the audience might reject a proposition, might reject the product or the brand. What sentiments do our ideas need to overcome? And Jane talks about an invaluable lesson that she learned in her MFA program about writing fiction and the importance of leaving enough, just enough, unsaid, so your audience has a little work to do, because that's what creates the magic. So we talked about that. We talked about magic and AI. We talked about AI too. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you will too. Here's my talk with the novelist Jane Roper. What is the song that you're listening to now that's just stuck in your head? Are you a music person?
I mean, embarrassingly, I'm not. Like, I'm not a person that I don't listen to a ton of music because I cannot work with music playing.
Mm.
So, especially if it has words.
Oh,
So,
okay. So, okay, a podcast or TV show that you're like, that you just love
ah,
watching.
yeah, you know what I'm watching? I'm watching the latest season of Somebody Somewhere, which I
Oh,
freaking
okay.
love. Have you watched it?
I have watched one episode. My wife was into it, and I've
Yeah.
heard so many good things about it. Yeah.
It's so great. It's just about these folks who are kinda like misfits in I
Yeah.
believe they're in Kansas, and they're trying to, like they're figuring out their lives, but also just trying to find their people, figure out what friendship
Mhm.
means. But I
Mm.
love the fact that you don't think about there being, like, queer folks in rural Kansas or small town
Yeah.
Kansas, but there
Yeah.
are, yet that's not, like, the whole focus of the show. It's just a fact. Uh, but the family dynamics are great, the friendship dynamics are great, and it's funny as hell too, so I'm really loving that.
I saw a review, the guy at, I don't know if he's at the New Yorker or the New York Times, I can't remember, but, it's like, picture a New York film critic, and it's this guy, kind of like sunken cheekbones and long, scraggly beard, and he's very enthusiastic about cinematography. And, that was his, I think his number 2 series for the year. I can't remember what number 1 was, but he was so, um, waxing eloquent about that show and its reality, and it's like, "You live in New York, dude." What do I
Yeah.
know?
It's definitely it's different from what's out there, it's just it's truly unique and it's got, like, a different rhythm from a lot of TV that's out
Yeah.
there right now, so, uh
And honestly, that's kinda what matters, right? Like, if
Yeah.
you how do any of us create something that resonates? It's like, stick to your guns, find authentic truth, and just keep at it, and someone's gonna latch onto it, you know? Um, so where did you grow up? I mean, I know we met in Boston, but, like, are you an East Coast person? Like, where what 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 rocks and dirt sort of infused your upbringing and who you are?
So, I'm a tri-state area gal, I grew up in Connecticut, not too far from New York, Fairfield
Okay.
County Fairfield,
Mhm.
actually.
Yeah.
But I spent a ton of time in Maine when I was growing up because my
Mm.
parents worked at or ran kids' summer camps, so I kind of had this weird hybrid identity as, like, the suburban girl and then, like, sort of spending my summers at weird hippie summer camps.
Have you Is that going to be your next book? Because I think that should be.
I actually wrote a book set at a summer camp, that was published by a small press years ago.
Okay.
It's not as good as my current writing, so I don't, like,
Mm.
recommend it, but, maybe I'll write something camp related in the future, I don't know.
I'm just thinking the notion of the suburban city girl whose
Mm,
job is the
yeah.
summer camp mechanics of it. Um, and I say that about Maine because I spent 4 summers during college playing the drums and working as a maintenance man at
Oh.
a resort in western part of Maine on Lake Kezar, and it was
Oh,
the
I know,
same. Stephen King lives on the lake, and
and I think there's a summer camp near there, actually,
could be,
a
yeah.
kid summer camp, Kezar
The re-
Falls, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kezar Falls, yeah, and the resort was called Quisisana. It's still called Quisisana, and yeah, I think as a Midwestern person, like summer camp is sort of like, wait, what? Where there's
Yeah.
not as much of that happening on the East Coast. Yeah, the notion of sending the kids off to summer camp is a longstanding tradition
Yeah.
and just
And
fascinating.
Jewish families, like, long summer, like, a lot of the camps,
Yeah,
there's certain camps, like, camps that my parents were in, like, had a lot of Jewish kids, and, they'd go away for, like, the full 8 weeks. It was just a
yeah,
lot of from New York City. It's like the idea is, like, you get out of the city for the summer. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, so
So and so you grew up in Fairfield, and I guess my question is leading to like, how did all of that influence your arrival into like marketing and advertising and ultimately into
Mm.
writing novels and like what inspired you? Did you know, at age 5, I'm gonna write novels? Like where did that
Mm, so weird. Okay, it's such a weird circuitous path. I'll try not to draw it out. I was writing creatively, like, from a very early age. I was writing poems, like, about flowers
okay.
and rainbows and
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
funny
Yeah.
monsters. And I loved creative writing at a very young age. And then
Mhm.
I don't know, gradually kind of shifted gears, got more interested in, well, the summer camp I went to had, when I was in middle school, had a USSR exchange. It was still the USSR, which gives away my age. But I did a summer at a summer camp in the Soviet Union, actually in what is now Ukraine on the Crimea, on the Black Sea. It was a Young Pioneers, summer camp, like the Soviet youth, organization. Yeah, it was nuts, it was nuts. It was part of a, peace exchange because this was, like, during glasnost and perestroika and stuff. So that really opened up my eyes to the broader world, and I became much more interested in, like, social issues and activism. I came back to high school after that, and I started an environmental group, and I got really more into social causes, and when I went into college, I mean, and by this time, I was, like, not writing creatively unless it was, like, a fun newsletter I did for my family, and I still love that as an outlet, but increasingly saw my direction as doing something more socially oriented, so what you know what I mean, like, do-gooder stuff, and in college, I was an anthropology major. I wanted to do, like, international development work. Um, I saw myself, like, traveling around the world, I don't know, with helping build wells and, infrastructure. I don't know what the hell I thought I was gonna do, but my first job out of college was at an international, nonprofit, and I liked it, but what I had the most fun doing was anything creative. Like, when I got to, like, help write the invitation for the fundraiser, I was like, "Oh, yeah, bring it on." And my dad, who worked in marketing at the time, I was miserable, but, like, I liked that aspect of the job, but I wasn't making any money, and my boss was kind of a nut. And my dad was like, "Why don't you just, there's this cool ad agency, Partners and Simons, that I do some work with. You should just go there, check out the scene." And I'm like, "Oh, no, I mean, I wanna save the world, blah, blah, blah." So I didn't do that, at first,
So
and then
so hold on a second. Your dad worked with Tom Simons.
a little bit, yeah, he more worked with people around Tom Simons, because he did market research, he did,
Yeah.
like, focus groups and that kinda stuff.
I
So he had
freelanced for Tom for a couple of
yeah.
years.
Well, that's
Yeah.
how you and I met.
Yeah.
That's you
I
and I
mean,
met
but
Tom, yeah.
I'm thinking about, yeah, like the Hollywood model and Tom's genius in sort of recognizing that like, there were different structures for how an agency could function. And I mean, he was
Yeah,
so ahead of his time in terms of that
totally.
and a great guitar player. So,
And a great guitar player and a really great guy. But, yeah, he was pulling together, creating teams.
yeah.
And now so many agencies have that
Right.
virtual model.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, long story short, like I ended up at Partners and Simons. I was Tom Simon's assistant, but he was like, I'm really organized. I really only need an assistant 50% of the time. So what do you want to do with the other 50% of the time? And I'm like, I want to write.
Yeah.
So next thing I know, I'm like segueing my way into copywriting. Um,
Isn't that great? Again, another character attribute about Tom was the sort of like, I'm highly organized.
Yeah.
And the self-knowledge and what I remember was his candor in
yes.
terms of just being able to say, here's the situation. Now what do you want to do with it? And whether it was, good news or bad news, but even I think thinking of you and like, okay, here's what I need you to do, but then to kind of put the onus back to say, what other way do you think you can create value here? You
Right.
know? And you're like,
And also I the generosity of it too,
right.
because he had other, folks who came after me, and they went in other directions. One became Marie Rocket, became this incredible art director, designer. Someone else got into doing like, uh, what was it? I guess she moved into doing like traffic and then into account management. So, he really, I think it was a generosity on his part too, to be like, let me help you go in the direction you wanna go, in exchange for having to deal with my calendar.
So, so is that the space where you maybe might have recognized, okay, I'm an ideas person, I'm a creative person, like for a living?
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly where
Okay.
I reconnected with yes, I always knew I was a creative person, but that was where it was like, "Okay, I can do this for a living," and that's amazing, and I really I fell hard in love with copywriting and the whole world, but at the same time, it wasn't long before I guess because I'd re-warmed up those creative muscles, I was like, "Okay, but I wanna use that creativity in other ways as well." I wanna do more longer form storytelling that I can't do, and storytelling that doesn't have to follow a creative brief and then get, like, nitpicked by a client.
Well, and you talk about falling in love with copywriting and like in my brain, I'm like, okay, there was that Bob Moore ad. There was, that Mark Fensky ad. There was that Kara, what's her face? She did all the
Rich?
jewelry at Goodrich ad. Like I'm thinking of like famous copywriters and like
Yeah.
usually long Neil French, what were some favorite like can you recall like print ads that like you went, that sings to me?
Well, speaking of the Cara those Shreve, Crump, and Low
Right.
ads, those beautiful print ads were
Yeah.
wonderful that
Right.
he did, and then, there were also some Swiss Army knife ads that Mullen did by a guy named Dylan Lee, who was ended up at Wyden, and, oh, who else? But yeah, I remember admiring Kara Goodrich a lot, also because there weren't a lot of female copywriters, it was a time when it was like, I don't know, I'm guessing it was probably 75% male, among copywriters. So, anytime there were women copywriters there was Sally Hogshead was one that was coming up
Sally. Oh my
at the
God.
time,
I have her book up here somewhere. Yeah.
yeah.
The great Kara story from my perspective was she was working at Arnold. And I don't remember what account she was running. Um, and I think we had won a piece of business. It might have been something like it was like EMC. It wasn't the VW business. It was something technical. And there was just a hallway conversation about like, well, what are you working on? And I think we were looking for people who could help us manage it because all of a sudden we were getting crazy busy. And it was like one of these like life lessons from, the great Kara Goodrich. And she's like, oh, I don't really like to work on things where you have to explain what the product is. And I remember part of me being like, "Oh, I can't believe, how like jaded you are." But upon reflection, years later, I have to say she was genius because as a writer, it's what's the political adage when you're explaining, you're losing. Um, but if you have to do advertising where you're trying to help people, you're trying to educate people and help them necessarily understand what this thing is,
Yeah,
it's really tough.
it
And
is.
and I what I liked about Kara, she had just no qualms about protecting her space as a creative person, and that kind of like the briefing and the process by which you were gonna be able to evaluate her creativity. Um, and I think kind of, to her credit, kind of recognizing that Yes, advertising is writing and creativity, but it is also political. It is also a business, and those other factors will absolutely affect your creativity. So you have to kind of know how to play them and work them
Yeah.
to your favor.
Yep.
She's fat. I wonder what she's doing these days.
Yeah, we should look her up.
I
Yeah, I
should
mean,
get her on
that's
the
great
podcast. Yeah.
if you have that choice, you know, and
Right.
she was at a point in her career where she had choice to say, "No, I don't wanna work on that." But yeah, when you have to work on it, it's that but I don't mind the sometimes I find that challenging that challenge exciting. I think sometimes having more parameters and more restrictions, more limitations, to a point, it can be really helpful and, um you know, sometimes too much freedom is restrictive in a way because you go and that actually relates back to writing novels, when you have so much freedom and sometimes you're like, "I wish I could be in more of a box. I wish I had a brief for this thing." Um, but yeah, but it's like that sweet spot, like, I have enough of a challenge here where I'm trying to do something that maybe isn't my ideal, but not so
Mhm.
much restriction that it becomes like, "Oh god, yeah, I have to explain how we innovate and whatever, leverage this blah bitty blah to, you know, tech stuff."
So the spark gets fired, the fuse is burning, you're working in advertising. It like how soon after getting into that were you like, oh, okay, I have to write a novel, and like give me a sense of that first novel. Like how long did it take to write? And because
It
I've
really
never written a novel, so
yeah. Well, it wasn't that long, to be honest. I mean, it was really let's see, my first advertising job, like, when I got that first copywriting job, I think I was, like, 23, and by 27, I was applying to MFA programs and trying to, you know, go do at 28, I was at, the Iowa Writers Workshop working on a first novel. I was working mostly on short stories at that point, but then my second year, I segued into writing a novel. And so the very first novel I wrote, which was not published, I'd say it took me, like, 3 years, um, which yeah, is you know, and when you're juggling another job, like, that's not terrible. The next one I wrote, I think it took a little shorter. Then there was one that late that one was published, that was the camp one, and then the next novel I worked on for 5.5 years, but I had little kids, one of whom had cancer in the midst of that. So, who's doing great now, she just got into college, which is so amazing. Yeah.
is she like freshman this year?
No, she's a senior in high school, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
she and her twin they just got their college acceptances, so we're all like,
Oh,
"Woohoo." Uh,
congratulations. I have
thank you.
my senior in high school is looking, we're now doing some, he's been accepted. So now we're going to go tour, and like we're going to New
Nice.
York in January, and then he's going out to LA, and he's into
Awesome.
music. So yeah.
Oh, cool. Nice,
Yeah.
nice. Excellent. Yeah, it
Well,
is nice.
congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you too. Um So yeah, but then I got that novel didn't get published, so I for
Mhm.
the next and I was so heartbroken and so
Mm.
pissed, so I'm like, "I'm never gonna spend that long on a book again." So I wrote the next one in, like, a year and a half, and that was a
Ugh.
society thing,
Yeah.
which, you know, to get published. So it varies. I think it var Hey, there it is, The Society of Shame. Available now wherever fine books are sold.
Yeah. There's just something about the tangible, like I am holding the thing that it,
Yes.
given the humans and our history and whatever, like you can't hold a website, you can't necessarily hold a social media post. And there's something about
Yeah.
the totem
Mhm.
of the book that just has such an incredible value. Um,
We used to be able to hold print ads. You could do that. That was
right.
fun. You know,
Used
it's
to
nice
walk
to
around.
be like, "Here's a magazine," or like, "Here's a billboard, the thing that I
Right.
wrote."
Has
There's
been,
nothing like it. It
yeah,
really is amazing. This thing that yeah, that's been living on your computer that suddenly is a thing in the world, and it's the wildest thing if you go into a bookstore and there it is. It's like, "Oh, it's
yeah,
here too. It's multiplied." Like, that is amazing. It's a great feeling.
yeah.
It is
And the notion that, your book, like it'll stick around, like that billboard or whatever, like won't be here
that's
tomorrow, but the
temporary,
book
right. Right.
will be on my shelf for a long, long time. So
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating. So, and just thinking about like collaboration and your perspective on other creative people, like when you look back at at agencies and designers, art directors, other writers, creative directors, like what are the kind of the habits or, the behaviors that distinguish the best ones, the most successful ones in your mind?
Hmm. I mean, I think, the folks I'm most impressed with are the ones, when I partner, I mean, I don't do it a ton anymore, but when in the past, when I partnered with a designer or an art director, is just I like someone who can think in a different language from their native language, by which I mean I love art directors who can think verbally,
Mm.
and who are thinking about language in addition to visuals. And likewise, I love to think in terms of visuals. So I think when people are like bringing cross pollination, like you speak each other's language, that can be really generative and helpful. So I love that. And I think the people who are comfortable kind of speaking multiple creative languages tend to be really, really successful. Um, I think also, uh, there's always I've encountered folks who come to the table with an idea already in mind that they're like
Mm.
clinging to, and then they don't want to let go of it. And like that, I worked with one guy who we only I we did not get along, and which I get along with most people, but this guy really rubbed me the wrong way. But on the several things we worked together, he tried to cram the same concept into like 3 different assignments,
Mm.
like for 3 very different clients. So it was like he had this like pet idea that he kept
Yeah.
trying to work in, and that's almost never gonna work.
I often wonder about that psychology that like because I've been there, right? The other creative person has this concept that, like as you say, they can't get rid of, and
Yeah.
so they're trying to work out how do I take this thing that just won't leave my brain, and will it fit? Will it fit here?
Right.
Okay, okay. What if it fits here, or next week it fits over here?
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, like, maybe there's another book character for you. But like it's like someone who's got a key and they're just
Mhm.
constantly trying different
Yeah, they're just
locks.
trying to find it. Yep.
And
And you
and
hope
and
they do.
yeah, right. Exactly. But it's sort of maddening when it's like, oh, the key. Well, we're gonna
Right, here
try
it
it in
is
this.
again. Right, here comes the key again. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's fine as long as they're not clinging too hard to it, once they realize like, as w if they're willing to admit that, "You know what? That's not gonna be here, let's move on." I mean, the other thing is I am such a nerd for strategy. Like,
Mm.
one of the things that just drives me nuts is if people are coming up with creative that's not on strategy. I'm like,
Mm.
we know who the audience is. We know what their pain point is. Well, hopefully we do. If it's a
Yeah.
good and like the account folks have done their job, we know what the key messages are we're trying to get at here. Your idea
Yeah.
is great, but it's not on strategy. Like,
Right.
and I often feel like the little like teacher's pet nerd, like, yeah, it's not on strategy. But I don't know. I think that's part of why I'm good at what I do is like
Right.
I'm good at combining creative and strategy. And
But I
yeah.
also think that that's a hallmark of what defines a successful creative person
Yeah.
is that, not only can they read the room, that they also understand the role of a strategy and they understand that it actually is a means of kind of clarifying agreement and getting agreement up front with a good client. And it's helping, like you say, it's narrowing things down so in such a way that when you present the idea, it's like, aha, this is the only solution it could be.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that clients see that, right? And that's the
Yeah.
role that it sets up like a circumstance where clients are like, well, of course we're doing this. Yeah,
Yeah.
case closed.
And
And
isn't that best? The best when you find, like, the ideal line or lines or tagline or whatever, and it's like, I'd feel
yeah,
yeah, it's just
there's an
amazing.
epiphany, the
Yeah,
cosmos opens up and it's like, ah, okay.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And maybe that's what the person with the key is like because if you've had it once, if that's happened to you
Mhm.
once, oh,
Yeah,
you're gonna search for it.
of course.
You're gonna
Yeah.
like it's the dopamine rush or whatever that you like have to have.
Yeah.
So kind of thinking about strategy a little bit, like for your circumstances, like what's the best creative brief? Like what is in that brief? What is not in that brief? Like is it a piece of paper? I'll just say like we were going to talk about AI. I was chatting with a strategist who was taking input documentation, so like, customer surveys and strategy stuff, and they put it all into the Google Notebook LM, and they generated a podcast. And they said, here, creative people, listen to this. They had edited out parts of it, but listen to this, and then we're going to have a conversation, and that will be the briefing. And because I think part of it was that they recognized that some of their creative people were like, didn't like looking at words on paper, but they were more, because they'd been talking about
Yeah.
podcasts, and was like, well, here you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's interesting.
what's the optimal brief for you?
I would hate a podcast. I like seeing things on paper or a screen. I want it like flat in front of me, flat one way or the other.
Yeah.
'Cause I like to be able to refer back to it, and flip through. I don't like to have I don't like things that I have to absorb only sequentially, like a podcast. It's part of why I don't like Kindle book. I do read on Kindle, but it's really hard to like you can't flip back and forth and blah blah blah,
Yeah. Yeah.
easily. But I like a brief that is not too long. I hate a brief that they're just dumping everything in there, like every possible because the whole point is you need to narrow this down. We need a single message. I wanna know who the audience is. I wanna know who
Mhm.
they are. I wanna know what their pain points are. I wanna know why they wouldn't choose this product or offering.
Yeah.
What are the objections that we need to overcome? What do we need to, if they say, "No, no, I don't want it." Well, how do I need to overcome that?
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
And I like to, that's what I was gonna say. My mom had just texted me, so now I lost my train of thought. But, like, yeah, so, like, pain points, objections we need to overcome, who the audience is, but also just, like, yeah, what is that, like, single message, like, the single thing you wanna get across? Because so much of the time, you get a list of 5, and
Right.
it's just not gonna cut it.
Well, there's 2 points to that. The first is a brief should probably be brief,
Yeah.
right? Can you distill, which is an art form, which takes skill, takes experience. So, like distilling a brief down to like its essence is hard, and that's the reason why most people don't do it. Um, but the other challenge with a single-minded proposition or kind of the distillation is, but don't try and solve the problem, right? Like, don't write the tagline, don't write the headline, right? Because my reaction is like, we've winnowed it down to like blah blah blah. Here's the statements. Like, well, then we're done. Congratulations.
Right.
Um, your next job is to go create the campaign because you've already solved it. You don't need us. And this isn't meant to be cantankerous or offensive. It's more like congratulations. Like
Sure. Yeah, you did it.
you went through, you figured it out, and you came out with the solution. Like, let's go sell that.
Right.
Like there are plenty of other briefs. We're all way too busy. So, um, but it's an interesting, like, the struggle for a lot of great strategists is like getting to a point and like, I'm always saying like, if you have the answer, come on, let's have it out. Let's go. Cause
Right.
it may be an expression that we can work with and, adjust a word here or there or arrive at something.
You don't want to mistake I think sometimes, people mistake, like, the strategy for the creative expression of it, right? If you have, like, you know, I if your if your strategy is or your sort of positioning is like, "Okay, we're the most efficient way to do this," right? The concept can't be, "This is the most efficient way to do this,"
Right.
So there has to be, something that's gonna take it to another level, that's gonna connect with the heart, that's gonna connect with the mind.
Well, isn't I mean, and that's always the role of a creative person is to say, okay, it's the most efficient thing. Um,
Right.
my job is to help dramatize that, to
Right.
recast that in a way that is fresh, memorable, maybe catches people off guard a little bit and gets them to
Yeah.
go, What was that?"
Right.
And that upon reflection, they think, oh, it's the most efficient solution.
Right.
There we go. Right. If the audience's reactions affirms the strategy, you've got a great idea.
Yeah. One of my favorite, things that I learned, from a difficult professor when I was doing my MFA program, this guy Frank Conroy, a famous short story writer, who's since moved on to another plane, but he cantankerous old dude, but he had this great demonstration. He was like, what makes fiction, and in this case work, is you want the writer goes this far, the reader goes this far, and then what happens in the middle there is that magic where but if the writer goes too far, then it's like the reader's like, "Well, this you're just giving way too much away. You're shoving way too much down my throat, and I'm not interested." And if the reader doesn't do enough, then the reader has to do all the work, and it's like, "I don't know what I'm reading here. I don't know what's going on. This is way too open to interpretation. It's not making sense." So it's
Yeah.
like, you wanna get that right here, and then, like, like, in between is that electricity between where the writer and the reader each do, you know, eh yeah, where that magic happens in between.
And that's true of novels, but also great billboards or great print
Yeah,
ads or great
exactly.
TikTok series that like,
Right.
there's enough space in there for the audience to kind of insert themselves a little bit and kind of
Yeah. Well,
extract.
they get that dopamine rush, right? Because 'Cause they're
Right.
like, "Oh, I get it. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I get like, I made the connection." And it's much more fun and interesting. It's like yeah, like with a joke, it takes a second, and then you're
Right.
like, "Oh, yeah. Okay."
Right. Yeah. You can't over explain it. So I'm curious, like, how you think about, the business of being a creative person in writing in the context of, hey, now there's this thing called the internet, and it fundamentally changes culture. And oh wait, hold on. Now there's a thing called mobile and digital and social, and that's going to affect how writers and creative people work with audiences. And oh, now there's this thing called AI. Like, how do you hold space or think about the technological changes as a creative person, as a person trying to solve business problems with creativity?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it's one of those things where it's a new assignment and it's like,
Mhm,
okay, well, you know how to do it here. So here now your assignment is figure out how to make it work here. So I remember being kind of delighted when it was, banner ads came along and first it was like you remember it was like just the flash or whatever it was. They were basically like gifts and it was like frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, but you'd kind of figure out how to like build a little story in that. So that's something you can't do in a print ad because it's all
right.
there at once.
Mhm,
So, I kind of enjoyed that change.
mhm,
Uh, that was a good one. But then there have been others where I'm kind of like, I don't really enjoy this assignment. Like, come up with
mhm,
a social post, that was an assignment coming up with social media ads or social media, promoting posts that I don't enjoy so much. But, I see with each one you get kind of a fun new challenge to try. However, I put that in a different that's more about media, right? What is the medium? The medium for the message. AI is a whole other category, I think,
yeah.
because that is, it's competing with creativity, I think, and
Mhm,
maybe not and I worry that in the future, it's gonna be competing even more with creativity with creatives like us than it already is.
mhm,
Um, Personally, like, I've found it useful for research. Like, if
mhm.
I wanna, am I writing a blog article or something and I wanna, it's almost like it can just aggregate information and bring it all together in one place. Um
So let me give you a little bit of a kind of a runway, a little bit more sort of context around,
Mhm.
so yeah, the internet and then mobile and social, and then, in the last 2 years, it's been AI. How do you see AI being different from, say, social and mobile, and before that, the internet, in terms of affecting your task of being a creative person for business?
Um, I guess I see it as a threat. I mean, I don't really I don't see it in the same way as I see the other ones. I don't because it's not a medium, right? If we're talking
Mhm,
about those other changes, those are other ways of getting creative work out there. Those are other ways
mhm,
of getting creative messaging out. We're adapting to different,
mhm,
different modes of messaging or different amounts of space or different, ways to connect. But with AI, it's more like, "Well, how do you like ballpoint pens?" And I'm like, "I well, it's more like a tool for doing the creativity as a rather than something for showcasing it." You know what I'm saying?
mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yep.
um so yeah, I mean, and I would rather, come up with my own words than use AI to do it, and honestly, I have seen some companies trying to write blog posts and stuff with AI, and, instead of hiring people like me. I mean, I've had clients tell me that when they said like, I said, it's been a while. So, I used to write these things for you guys. What's up? I'd love to do some more or whatever. Like, yeah, well, you know what? We can't quite justify it because I can right now have ChatGPT write a really good draft and then I'll just go in and edit it myself, rather than paying you, more than $100 an hour to do it. So,
Mhm.
so far I've not had any great yeah, I'm not seeing it as and I have a real problem with visual AI. It makes me really it steals work. It feeds off of work of artists without
Mhm.
compensating them or crediting them.
Mhm.
And so instead of hiring an illustrator or photographer, people are and I see ad people do this. Like
Mhm.
I see people who own agencies or who are like, one person shops using AI generated images to like market. I'm like, what are you doing? Like you're trying to
Mm.
sell, you're someone who makes your living off original ideas and is trying to market your ability to create original ideas. And then you're using this thing that like steals other people's ideas and regurgitates other people's ideas. And
Mhm.
you're taking a job away. Like you're not paying a creative, you're not supporting a creative because it's
Mhm.
cheaper.
Yeah, we live in an interesting period where it's somewhat analogous to the conversations that likely occurred around the camera. The film camera
Yeah.
gets invented and portrait painters were obviously a little put out
Yeah.
in a sense because they had a monopoly on a way of representing people. And all of a sudden technology said, well, now there's another way to represent people.
Right.
Um, and uh, I'm of kind of two minds about the the attribution space, or in part because, like, just say like when I was getting my degree in jazz, the assignment was quite literally, okay, we need you to listen to Miles Davis only. Just listen to these like 4 or 5 recordings over and over and over and over for an entire semester. That's all you're going to listen to. And when you are in an improvisation situation, um, we need you to play as if you are Miles Davis. So it was a physical, mechanical, like listen to someone, figure out all their nuances and their patterns, and then when you are playing, channel them. And it, and
Mm,
and really what that exercise teaches you is muscle memory to just
yeah.
say like, "Hey, when Miles walks up to solve this problem, a certain song at a certain tempo with these players, Miles would solve it this way. So
Yeah.
can you figure out how to do that? And by the way, next semester you're going to be Sonny Stitt or someone else.
Right.
And you do an accumulation of that over a couple of years, and suddenly various characters are sort of bleeding into each other, and you are interpreting the patterns that come out of you are a different mixture of but bits and pieces of a little bit of Miles and Sonny and someone else
Right,
when
right.
you're improvising.
I I think to the extent that it can be a a tool, a sort of behind the scenes tool, and I guess
Mhm.
you could argue whether your example is that or not, right?
Mhm.
Because, there is the illustrator or whoever who might have been called upon to do that in the
Right.
past, not being called upon anymore.
Yeah.
Such is the way of industry, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm romantic in the sense that I don't know, I think, like, part of how we run businesses should be, like, to employ people too, and
Mhm.
not just try to, like, maximize profit margins. Um, but, and if the girl looks a little different in this frame and that frame because a human did it, well, whatever. We've
Right.
somehow managed to make commercials for, for TV
Yeah.
commercials for 50 years. Um, but, I think there certainly are, for example, in the novel writing world, a friend of mine who's a writer was trying to figure out actually, this was a memoir she was writing, and she was like, "I know this chapter's good, but it just feels kinda all over the place, and I'm not quite sure if it's cohering." So she copied and pasted it into ChatGPT and was like, "Make an outline of this chapter." And it totally did it. It created like a summary walking through, and she could tell from the summary that ChatGPT created, like, "Oh, okay, so this point I wanted to make clearly isn't coming through strongly enough because ChatGPT didn't pick up on it. It didn't pick up on
Mhm.
that point I was making." So I thought that was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
That's something I wanna try because I think yeah, as a tool for that, if it can step back and, like, parse information and say,
Yeah.
"Did you make the point you were trying to make?" That's pretty cool.
I have found where AI has value as a writer is that sort of either as an intern, like, hey, can you guys go look up these things for me and kind of come back and just give me an example of research or whatever. But then as a kind of an editor partner to say, like, okay, I've done the hard work of slogging through and getting things organized. Hey, it I could totally ignore your opinion, but is this clear? Like,
Yeah.
and what I've often done is to say, um, this sort of reminds me of an exercise that Bill Heater introduced me to, which
Mhm.
was like right before, in the days before we go present to a client, the question to ask is, okay, before we're finalizing everything, what are 5 reasons why what we're recommending is a dumb idea? Like poke holes in it,
Poke
right?
holes in it. Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
that's
try
great.
hard. Try hard to be skeptical of the work. Like what are the questions that when they ask us, we're gonna go, ugh, we're screwed, we can't answer that. And that's kind of how I have been using various AIs. Like once I've got something constructed, I think it's brilliant. Of course I do, but to have someone kind of come in and just say, well, there is a gap here. And
Mhm.
what do you mean by this? And this could be a little bit more effective. Um, and sometimes they're right. And sometimes the AI is like, "Oh," you're like, "Oh, thank God I did that because I fixed some problems that, I was too delusional. I was too in love with my darlings, you
Right,
know,
yeah, exactly. See
to
it.
notice."
Yeah, no, I think to that extent, and it's bringing in a new tool rather than a
Mhm.
new capability rather than trying to replace something human, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like, to that degree, I find it exciting,
Mhm.
but it's when it's trying to replace human activity, then it's where I find it depressing.
Right. I'm the glass half full kind of hopeful that, because of AI, people who maybe weren't telling the stories that they needed to tell are somehow able to, you know?
Maybe,
Um,
yeah, I mean, that would be nice, yeah, I guess the problem is, and I know, teachers, professors running into this is folks who could tell the story if they worked hard enough at it or, try to learn how to write or are taking the easy way out, and
yeah.
using AI, so that's sad.
Yeah, it's true. So what does the next year and a half look like for you? Or what sort of adventures are you planning on? And what do you hope to achieve? What mountains are
So,
you going to climb?
now that I've climbed all 48 of the 4,000 footers in New Hampshire, I don't have any specific goals. I'll just climb the mountains that look the most interesting. But in terms of metaphorical mountains, I am working on another novel, so that's exciting.
Congrats. Hooray.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's fun. I'm really having fun with it. I'm starting to do more kind of editing and coaching
Mhm,
for other writers, which I've really enjoyed, kind of,
mhm,
helping with accountability and helping them as they develop a book, figure out how to move forward, kind of talk through tough points, do some spitballing. I really enjoy that, and I'm hoping to ramp that up a bit as well. So those are the 2 sort of on a creative level. I can't think of anything terribly exciting, new challenge-wise or new, uh, on the advertising front, except that I'm in this period right now where, there's been a bit of a changeover, and I'm meeting a bunch of new, small agencies, which is fun. A lot of, like, sort of design agencies that are looking to connect more with writers. So I'm enjoying creating those new relationships. That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about your process for writing a novel. Do you sit down at 9 o'clock sharp every day and do 3 hours? Like I'm thinking about Stephen Pressfield, War of Art, or Annie Lamott, Bird by Bird. Like,
Yeah. I
what
love
is the Jane Roper methodology? How will this novel be written?
In terms of the process, I try most mornings to get up and get in a couple of hours of work before business hours. So I'll
Hmm.
get up at 6:30,
Hmm.
right from 6:30 to 8:30, because I feel like once it starts to be like the rest of the world's waking up and emails are starting to get written, I can feel them like creeping into my consciousness, and I'm like, "Ah, crap," and, I've got this deadline, and I know I need to get back to this person. So I find that getting up before the workday helps a lot. Uh,
Hmm.
so that's a key part. Yeah, obviously, like, if I'm not crazy busy, then I can extend that. I also try to get away by myself for a few days at a time, about every other month. I would do it once a month if I could, but, I get so much more done if I'm like off in an Airbnb or residency or some other neutral space where there are no distractions. There's no like bathroom I should be cleaning or no like kids texting me asking if I can get a ride. They can get a ride somewhere. I don't have to think about what I'm going to make for dinner. It's just nothing but me and writing and like my own schedule. And it's when I do that that I can churn out, 30 pages over the course of a few days, whereas most weeks it's like, "Ooh, I wrote 10 pages, in this entire week."
Well, you bring up such an interesting part of like the whole creative process, which is that, you know, before you were charged with writing a book or before the idea came to you or an ad campaign or whatever, there's this sort of expectation, right? And it usually gets expressed in the form of a brief or, well, you have another novel, your editor or publisher is like, when do we get to see that? To get in there and do it is hard work. It is
Yeah.
day in, day out. And I think that's the part that, an AI isn't necessarily, gonna solve, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Or find joy in, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
there is something important about the joy of the daily slog and even the days where nothing comes out,
Yeah.
you
No,
know?
well, yeah, because it's those days when nothing comes out that get you to the days where it does come out, and then you're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is the best." It's like when you have that moment, have the breakthrough of that awesome tagline or that awesome idea, concept, and, do you find when you walk away from I'm curious because I know for a lot of people, it's like when you're not working, when you're not thinking, like, that's when the
Yeah.
idea pops through. Like, I like, literally the in the shower thing or the
Yes, 100% I agree. Yes, that has happened. Um I find either that it's in the morning when like not enough anxieties have formed strong enough opinions to like then drive the rest of my day that like connections, creative connections kind of happen or it's when I'm doing something else. Yeah, like you say, it's you step out of the shower or I am one of those people that, worst case scenario, it's a note on the phone, but I have post-it notes and a pen kind of with me and you're dropping someone off here in the grocery store and there it is.
Yeah. Well,
Quick.
that's why, like, it's so important that we don't fill every down moment with looking at our phones, because
Yeah.
it's like, I think I've gotten, better at, like, when I'm in line at the grocery store, like, when I'm waiting in the doctor's or if no,
Yeah.
that's not secret, but, like, I don't wanna fill every available moment with this, because then I'm
Right.
not leaving space for the ideas to come in, like,
Mhm.
you gotta daydream, you gotta be bored, you gotta be and maybe that's why, why the shower moments and the walking, because I'm not, like, filling every second with something, I'm, like, space for ideas to come in, and I think we all have to do that, and not be slave to the constant, like, content input, input, input thing.
I don't know a better way to end this than that. So
There we go.
perfect. Thank you so much. This has been
Thank
so much
you.
fun.
Yeah.
Wasn't that awesome? Thanks, Jane. Thank you for your insights and perspective. So many good ideas. I've got links to Jane's books and her website in the show notes. You should check out her latest. It's called The Society of Shame. It's a fantastic read. Okay, there's more to Curiosity plus Courage in the pipeline. If you're so willing, please tell someone about this podcast. Tell someone about the newsletter that's available at timbrunel.substack.com. Thank you for sharing this with another person. Here's the thing, my work, it's free to subscribe to. The only cost is your time to enjoy them, which is invaluable, right? Your time is invaluable. So that's the bar I endeavor to reach. Thanks for spending time with me. I hope you're staying healthy and curious. Until next time.